I was in the pit of rebellion. And so the best thing she could have ever done for me was just kick me out. Said, you're out. I don't know where you're going. I really don't care. You're not going to do those drugs in my home.
Episode 77, Missoula Podcast. Welcome back to the show. Russ Smith.
Here I am.
Thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
How's the new year starting off?
For me, it's starting off really well. Yeah. I love the snow. So this snow in the last couple of days, that's my game.
Why is that your game? What do you enjoy about the snow?
I'm a 4 seasons guy.
Okay.
I love 4 distinct seasons. And I like wearing long sleeves. I don't know why. I just like long sleeves. I prefer it over short sleeves. So this is it. It's a new season. Get to wear long sleeves. The snow looks great. I love when it's falling and, like everybody else, it's quiet.
It was kind of a bummer that we didn't have any snow over Christmas.
How weird.
That was weird.
Yeah.
But we have it now. So
have it.
Russ, first question for you. Tell me something about who you are today that was influenced by growing up here in Missoula or the family in which you came from?
January 1 of this year is the completion of 34 years in full-time ministry, the beginning of 35 years. And I would not be in this game this long or have life experiences to help people through their life challenges without my growing up here, the mistakes I made, the successes I've had, and the family that surrounded me and the family that I've been able to build. So it all is really 34 years is a byproduct of all those relationships.
What specifically about your family of origin helped you in 34 years of ministry? I mean, what was it about growing up in that family that maybe had some impact?
In a kind of a backhanded way. So grew up with a dad that was half native, half white. He grew up in Hays, Montana on the Fort Belknap Reservation. And so he grew up in a time frame of, there was no political correctness, and he was angry and disliked and learned to dislike. And so he raised his 5 boys with an iron fist and very strong discipline. And so having to navigate that. And then when Tracy and I adopted our child, number 5 child, our first adoption, when he came into the family, and him being biracial, my dad fell in love with him. It was like, it was almost like my dad saw his own blood for the first time, and it completely changed him, and it changed his and my relationship. Therefore, he began to open up and tell me about his pains and what he went through in World War II and what we now call PTSD, and how he had to just navigate that by himself. And it helped me understand who he was and why he was, which helps me when I meet with people in a counseling session or when I have the opportunity to speak from a platform. If I come from a position of understanding who they are, I'm far better at communicating with them, and it helps me be a better communicator and better son, better dad, better husband.
So what were some of obviously your dad going through a lot, his upbringing, the war, and having to navigate some racial stuff, it sounds like. What were some of how did that come out as a dad when he was raising you and your brothers? Like, what were some of the negative things, and what were like some of the most positive things that came out of that?
Well, the negatives were he honestly didn't know, although there was some racial slurs and racism. He didn't know how wrong it was. He didn't know, because his whole growing up in Hays, Montana was being hated by one people group or the other and not knowing where he fitted. And so that was just who you were. And then in World War II, of course, with the conflict with the Japanese after Pearl Harbor and the Germans and the different encampments of Americans, he learned, in a war, there's a piece of you that you almost have to hate in order to take other people's lives. And so by the time he got married to my mom and had 6 children, 5 boys, and we're all just really strong personalities. And so we grew up hearing the racial slurs and the pain and the anger and the hatred. And for some reason, Stephen, I really don't understand this. It didn't land on me. I'm the baby of the family, and it actually trajected my life the other direction. I would beg my mom to adopt a little black boy. That was my desire. And her heritage is Boston, Massachusetts. And so we would family trips to Boston every 2 years. And her family lived in the projects. And the white projects were one street away from the black projects. And so as a child, when we'd vacationed at Boston, I would play with the black children. And it puzzled my dad why I would. And it puzzles me why I would, because I wasn't taught that was appropriate. And so I never understood why that didn't land on me. But again, then later in life, when really God changed his heart, the last 10 years of his life, he and I had an amazing friendship and spent a great deal of time together, had lunch on a consistent basis. I always paid for it. I'm not sure how he figured that out, but those 10 years made up for the previous 75 years of pain. And so it really ended up being a beautiful relationship. And man, I miss my dad a ton. He's in heaven, and I miss him a ton. But he just didn't know. He truly didn't know that racism was wrong until late in his life.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the beginning of your story, growing up here in Missoula. What was Missoula like as a kid? What part of town did you live in? Where'd you go to elementary school?
Missoula was a hallmark movie in my world, the place to live. Grew up on, I guess we call the South Side, not far from here. We're on Eaton Street. Eaton, where the mall now sits, was actually a lumber mill. And
wait, so the mall hasn't always been there?
Well, no, it hasn't always been there. I think the mall came
so they didn't have malls when you were a kid.
Well, 1977. So when I was a teenager, they had malls.
Crazy.
Yeah. So the lumber mill was there. And so we lived just across the tracks from the lumber mill. And within one house of next door to us, across the street from us, the other side of us, there was a collection of 11 boys in those homes. And we were the boys. We were the South Side boys. And we did everything together. And, there's a meme out on social media shows a bunch of boys on bikes that says, our parents have no idea how many miles we put on our bikes every day while they were at work. That was us. Like, we rode our bikes around the city. We'd sneak into what now, Splash, Montana was the Spartan Pool. And we'd sneak into the Spartan Pool and get chased out and ride our bikes through the lumber mill, and the millwrights would chase us and try to get us out of there. And we were safe when the lights, the street lights came on. We went home, and it was still an era where, at least in my house, my mom, when it was time for dinner, we had to dress for dinner. So time for dinner. So we had to go wash up, change our clothes, come to the table clean. And so it was Mayberry RFD in my mind. We were safe. We didn't even think about a predator. Just 10 or 11 boys always on their bikes, playing games and living the best life.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to CS Porter, which was a grade school 1st through 8th. So I went there all 8 years. Kindergarten, I went to the Lutheran school or Lutheran church across the street from Sentinel High School. And then 1st through 8th at CS Porter.
And then where was high school for you?
High school was at Loyola High School. That's a crazy story how I ended up there. my next oldest brother was quite the drug distributor. And so he had gotten in a significant amount of trouble at Sentinel High School. And so at the end of his junior year in Missoula
So
County.
at the time, there was just Hellgate and Sentinel.
Yeah,
correct?
just Hellgate and Sentinel. Yeah. So at the end of his junior year, Missoula County Public Schools said, "You're not welcome. Your behavior is unacceptable here, so find something else." Well, Loyola was really just becoming a great school, a great prep school. And so back in those days, they didn't care if you were Catholic or in trouble. They wanted your tuition. Bring us the money. And so my parents enrolled my brother there as a senior, and I was going to be a freshman. So I'm just going to follow him. So I went to Loyola, and it's a great high school. I had a great 4 years of high school. I really got deep into the drug scene by the time I graduated, but that was more on my parents divorcing that really sent me spiraling. But in terms of a high school experience, awesome.
So I don't want to go too much into that pain, but I don't want to
Bring it.
breeze past it. Why do you think that you gravitated towards getting in trouble and the drug scene by the end of your high school career? I mean, I know the divorce, but
Right.
what specifically about that was attractive to you?
Well, I had actually experimented with drugs from about 6th grade. Again, older brothers introduced me to marijuana in the summer of my 6th grade year. Got into high school, played high school football, kind of learned about this thing called speed that would kind of pump up my adrenaline. And so I used it in high school sports. So I kind of messed with it through high school. And then the summer between my junior and senior year, my parents divorced. And that was a really hard on me. I was the last one at home. All my brothers and my sister, she's the oldest, all 5 of my siblings were gone, and it was just me. And so I didn't have a go-to. And in that day, Lolo was a long ways away, and we lived in Lolo, and I went to Loyola. So there was no peer group to be with. So it was me in my bedroom with my hurting and broken dad. And so I just spiraled. Yeah. And drugs were the option, and they were available. And because my dad wouldn't let me do them, I moved in with my mom, and my mom was going through her own pain, and I was in the pit of rebellion. And so the best thing she could have ever done for me was just kick me out. Said, "You're out. I don't know where you're going. I really don't care. You're not going to do those drugs in my home." And it really was the best thing she could have done for me.
Where did that take you when she kicked you out?
I moved in with 2 of my older brothers. The 3 of us got a trailer in Travoy Village. Out there on North Reserve, way out on North Reserve or North Russell. And so got a trailer out there. And then our primary source of income was just dealing dope. That's what we did. And only by the hand of God did I graduate high school my senior year. And that's because my current wife, my first wife, Tracy and I met the summer before my senior year, and she graduated from Hellgate High School a year ahead of me. And it was interesting. 3 weeks into our relationship, I told her, "You're the one I'm supposed to marry. I just know that."
Wow.
And she laughed at me because I was a doper. I mean, what do you're talking through your weed. And so
How'd you guys meet? Where'd you meet?
we met, we worked at what was called the Village Twin Theater, which is now where there's restaurants over there.
McKenzie River.
McKenzie River, 5 on Black, Verizon.
Remember that theater?
I remember.
Yeah, the Village Twin. And
wait, so it was just 2 theaters? So I remember it as the Village 6.
Yeah, they expanded it. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, we met there, and
Wait, do you remember the 3-plex over by like where Hoo Hot is? The Dollar Theater?
Yeah.
That might have been before my time.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So we met working together at the movie theater, and my senior year of high school, I was deep in drugs. I was really an escalation of drug use. But she said, I'm not going to marry a high school dropout. And she came to my house every morning, drugged my butt out of bed, drove me to Loyola, dropped me off, made me go to school. My girlfriend made me go to school my senior year of high school. I'd have never made it without her. There's no question.
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like Tracy obviously was a big help in starting to clean stuff up. But when did you turn the corner away from the doping and the drugs and the selling? When did that happen?
And why did you turn the corner?
And why? Yeah. Good question.
There really were two significant turning points. And I think every addict has these. One was one specific night in 1980. We were eating LSD, to go on an LSD trip. And unfortunately, ate more than we thought we had. The guy that mixed it incorrectly. And so what we thought we were eating, about 4 hits of LSD, we ate the equivalent of 12. And Tracy, myself, and one of my older brothers. And so I knew immediately, like, this is not good. And, when you overdose on an amphetamine, cocaine or whatever, you basically have a heart attack. Your heart explodes. You just can't take the ramping up. But when you overdose, most common, when you overdose on a hallucinogen, you don't die. You just stay stupid. And I knew that this was it. This was a point of no return. And so my brother and my wife and I were actually driving in my van trying to find my dogs that had escaped. And I told my brother, it's over. I can't, this is it. I'm checking out. And so he said, man, you got to park this van right now. You got to park it. And so crazy, I parked it in the parking lot of the church I grew up attending. And I grew up going to First Assembly of God, now Christian Life Center, when it was over on Stevens Street, which is now some kind of like an assisted living home or something for senior citizens, right across from Sacagawea Park.
Missoula Aging Services.
Yeah.
MAS. Yeah.
Right. So that was in the behind that was a parking lot in the old days, and ended up in that parking lot. And Tracy, up to this point, had no faith in God. I'm not sure if she was agnostic or atheist. She just had no value for anything spiritual. So I really believe that the Lord wanted her heart and wanted to turn mine. Because I knew early in life I was called to be a pastor. I knew. I have a picture of myself when I was 3 years old, standing on a footstool in our front room with a music stand, with my dad's Bible, preaching to my stuffed animals on the couch.
Did you convert any of them?
Well, except Eeyore. He's a donkey. So I knew that I was called early in life. So that night, we just cried out one of those prayers that probably everybody prays in their life. God, you get me out of this, and I'll do anything. You get me out of this, I'll serve you. And we just cried out, you get me out of this, I'll just serve you. And Stephen, it was incredible. It was, in my pastoral mind, it was a normal conversion. Everything should change when you meet Jesus. And instantly we were no longer high. Instant. The three of us, it was over. But not just that. I was free from addiction that night. Done. Free. My mind restored. I ended up through life going back and getting a master's degree. 6 amazing children. Everything got restored that night. Amazing. One prayer. This guy, Jesus, rocked my world. But it was the only world I really knew. So I still kind of dabbled with marijuana. I'd smoke it here and there, and we'd have Bible studies and smoke joints and talk about the Bible. And so we kind of dabbled in that. And then we had children. And I remember watching my son. I just really had finished doing a bong hit, and I watched my son crawl in front of me, and it was one of those epiphanies. I was like, "What? I'm a dad. I got to figure this out. This is ridiculous." And so Tracy and I made a decision. We're done. We're done. Like, we're done. And we actually cut off every relationship that had anything to do with that world. For 2 years, we were probably the loneliest 2 years of my life. No real friends, no real connections. The church didn't know what to do with me because I'm kind of a wild card. And the world no longer wanted anything to do with me. And so, but on looking back on it, it was the most incredible 2 years of growing in my marriage and as a man and as a dad. And really, all I had left was my Bible and falling in love with Jesus. And we just did what we knew was right. Here's the funny part. We never really were discipled. We just knew, okay, we're Christians. We go to church, we serve, we tithe, and we read the Bible. That's what we do. We just do.
And nobody taught you
Nobody
that.
taught us that. We just knew. That's what you do. Read it. That's what it tells you to do. You go be in community, you serve your community, you tithe your community, and you put his word in your heart. That's what you do. And so we just did that. And as life progressed, came out of that amazing, loving Jesus, radically saved.
I'd like to point out that I was that baby in the diaper that crawled across the room that day. And here we are, episode 77 of the Missoula podcast with Russ Smith, my father, as our guest here today. We never said that at the beginning. So here we are.
You also had some contact high
Yes.
when you were a baby.
That explains,
Well, back in his day, like
all your questions about me, Stephen, have now been answered.
yeah, there it is.
It all makes sense.
Well, Tracy, I mean, he was born in 1982. We have pictures of Tracy in the hospital holding him, smoking a cigarette. I mean, it's just what you did in the 80s.
Sure.
And now you know why he's like he is.
Makes sense. You turned out really well.
And with that, how about some rapid fire questions? Let's go back to the history of Missoula and some of your favorites here, Dad, in Missoula. Let's start with what is your initial memory of the Garden City?
My earliest memory, singular, is we grew up. I was born in a community medical center, which is now where the old Missoula Library is downtown. But we lived on Woodford Street, over in the slant streets in Woodford Street. But we were walking distance to a little candy store on Stevens Avenue called Stratton's. And it was a true penny candy store. And I remember walking there with my brothers down the alley in the back door of Stratton's, the back door, walking through their supply room. Hey, Mr. Stratton, Mrs. Stratton, and buying penny candy. And then, you know, when you're 3 and 4 years old, 10 cents, that's 10 pieces of candy. So, bro, that was like an afternoon.
Yeah, that'll last you.
Big day.
Last you 20 or 30 seconds.
Woo! Yeah, that was a big day. So that was my earliest single memory. And then the Western Montana Fair was just what our family did. We lived for the fair. Yeah.
What's your go-to coffee shop in Missoula?
See, that's I'm gonna be that guy and not have one because I have my favorite worst coffee shop in Missoula that I go to, and it's not a coffee shop, but it's the worst coffee in Missoula. But I go there because it's the worst coffee. So I go to IHOP for their terrible coffee. It's so bad. And I love it. I just go there because it's so bad.
5 cups later.
Oh, you are cranked up. Yeah. Every truck driver goes to IHOP, and you know why.
I can confidently say nobody has ever answered that question with IHOP before. That is a first.
It is clearly the worst coffee in the city. When I have meetings, I, for some reason, end up at City Brew, but my go-to is Starbucks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had 3 answers there.
Yeah, I really do.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's try following the rules on this one.
Okay.
What's your favorite restaurant in Missoula?
My favorite restaurant of my lifetime, here I am, more than one, is Double Front Chicken.
Solid.
Double Front. It's followed with Paul's Pancake Parlor.
Classics.
Yeah, absolutely.
What zip code do you live in?
59801.
What to you is the weirdest part about Missoula?
That's, I listen to your podcast, so I know that majority of people go, well, the people are weird, and they are. But
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Stephen, we have a listener.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad.
You do. You have a listener.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, what was always weird to me, and as simple as it might be, I can't figure out why Stevens, you take a little left, now you're on Orange.
That's a good point.
Who did that? And why does Stevens go sideways across the city, and then Orange goes north and south? what city planner sat down and went, this is going to be great. We're going to name it after one of the founders of the cities, the Stevens family. And then they're going to be, instead of going through that, we're going to put a park and make people go left, and we'll call it Orange. Who did that?
It wasn't good.
Yeah. So all my life, whenever I take that left, coming off of Stevens onto Orange, I'm like, this is weird.
What do you love the most about Missoula?
That's so easy. I love community, the community of Missoula, the community events. Last night, going to a local high school basketball game, chatting with the official, the referees, and the people in the stands, and even people I didn't know, but people I did know, new people I didn't know. So I met new people, and just that atmosphere. But then also, Missoula does so well at hosting community events. The homecoming parade, come on. Anyone that doesn't go to that is missing a great community day. The Missoula Marathon, I run in it, not because I'm fast or think I'm going to ever be in the top 300, 3,000.
300,000?
Yeah, exactly.
3 million?
There's a reason the ambulance follows me while I'm running. But it's such a great community. This city does so well at those feeling like you're part of something, and it's safe and it's fun and it's community. So that's easy. My favorite part of the city is community.
Has there been a specific book that has made the largest impact on your life?
Yeah. I have to say, I was thinking about that question, and I
Let me guess, you have two?
I had two. So I'm really trying to dial it in on one. And I could lean towards one. And this was back in a book that came out in the 1990s, written by a guy named Tommy Tenney, and it's called The God Chasers. And it was probably in that era of my life, I needed to be a radical God chaser. And Tommy Tenney wrote an astounding book on being a God chaser. And it kind of goes, it just opened the door to me to realize there's so much more than religion, so much more than church. And I'm a pastor, but there's so much more than just going to church, and just really pursuing God with everything I have, radical pursuit. And that book really put me on a new definition of what it meant to be in love with Jesus and not just have a relationship with him.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We're done with the rapid fire, but I'm going to add another question on top of it that I think is interesting. I didn't have to give you guys what I was going to say before.
Oh, thank you. I feel like we're going to like overtime right now. Like an extra period.
This is an extra period.
Okay.
Do you have a couple of quotes that have maybe guided your life more than others? Some sayings?
Oh, for sure. My life coach is a guy named Pastor Richard Crisco, and he pastors a church in Rochester, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. And he's my voice, whenever like, what would Richard do? But one of his, and he and I grew up in youth ministry together. I was a youth pastor for 17 years. And back in that day, the quote that still is with me is, in life, you deserve what you tolerate. And as a parent, when I let my child get away with, I deserve what I tolerate. It in my physical well-being, I deserve what I tolerate. In the way I'm kind to people, if they're not back kind, I deserve what I tolerate of myself, or deserve what I tolerate to come into my life. And that's just been really a defining comment from Pastor Richard. And then just to hear from my dad sometime in the last 10 years of his life, when he and I were building a really cool friendship, just to hear from my dad, that he would say, Russell, don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. I'm like, yeah. In his 86th year of life, don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. Really good perspective.
I like that. Let's jump back into your story. So you go through this lonely season where you don't really fit in with the church crowd. You don't really fit in with your old cronies that were slinging drugs, and you and Tracy are married and you have a new baby. What's the breaking point or where does life lead after that? What's next?
Wow. So I was working for a company that no longer exists in Missoula called U.S. Bearings and Drives, and they were a subsidy of Burnaby, Canadian Bearings and Drives in Burnaby, British Columbia, and significant back in those days corporation. I was climbing the ladder. I was gonna make it to the top, and so two events happened in 1990, which made me begin full-time ministry in 1991. One, sitting at my desk one day, and I grew up with a guy named Timmy. Timmy was 2 years younger than me, and he was my roommate in life. He lived with me. We did dope together. Timmy was always a part of my life as far back as I can remember. Well, his mom called me and at work and said that Timmy had taken a bunch of barbiturate drugs and put a gun in his mouth and ended his life, and asked if I'd be willing to speak at his funeral. And that was my third super close friend that had died a drug-related death. Another friend had committed suicide, and my best friend of life in high school, my closest guy, my man, my go-to, he had gotten mugged during a drug transaction and beaten quite severely. And 2 weeks later, he died. And then I spoke at his funeral, and then 2 weeks after that, his son was born. And I looked at his son, and it was like, he'll never know his dad. So I had three really close deaths through the drug thing. And at the same time, there was a guy in Missoula named John Hagee, and he was running the ministry Youth for Christ. You've had Josh Jones on here. And actually, when I went into Youth for Christ, Josh was a freshman in high school. We called him Josh the Frosh. And now he's the executive director over there. So, which I would like to make a note that when Josh was on here, he didn't call me out. And I've called him out for not calling me out. And I just called him out. So he owes me.
Noted.
Yeah.
Right
yeah. Because you asked him what was his favorite part, and he didn't talk about the cool Zuba pants that I used to wear.
Zubas.
And I texted him that day and said, bro, what about my Zuba pants? And he said, well, if they invite me back, I'll bring it up. Too late.
He's never coming back.
No,
no.
I wouldn't have him back. He didn't. Yeah. So John Hagee had taken me to lunch and said, I need you to come to work for Youth for Christ. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And he hounded me. And so one day we sat down to eat at a place called Paradise Pies, which no longer exists. The building still stands. It's right Rose Memorial Park. And so if you're headed down Stephen or down Higgins and you're at the stoplight, there's a building, there's a church that meets in there now, like an outdoor church.
It's like the Rose Park building or something like that.
Yeah. So there used to be a restaurant called Paradise Pies, and we're sitting there and we order our food and we're just doing life. And John says, okay, here's the deal. You know you're called. I know you're called. The only question is, when are you going to obey? And I went home and Tracy and I had a very, very long conversation that night. Went, my friends are dying. John's right. We got to do this. And so January 1, 1991, went full time into serving people and loving Jesus. Yeah.
I know you brushed over that. Like, I mean, you said, you gave us a story, but what was that tension like leaving a really, really good job? And I'm assuming going into full-time ministry, the financial aspect of that was crazy.
Well,
and how many kids did you have at that time?
We had 2.5. Our daughter Taylor was on her way, and Tracy was pregnant. And
I have siblings.
They know.
Oh,
we just haven't told everyone.
Breaking news on the Missoula podcast.
So it was crazy, and I'll tell you how I got through it. And I'll try to be brief, but I'm a pastor, so I just lied to you. I won't be brief. It was fearful, because we were giving up health insurance. We were giving up a guaranteed paycheck. With Youth for Christ, you have to raise all your own financial support, 100%. So we stepped into that realm. But I went and visited with my then pastor, Pastor David Ton, and he was at Christian Life Center. I sat down with him and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Going into full-time ministry, and want your blessing and your prayer." And he was fully supportive. Well, the next Sunday, we didn't know this. The next Sunday in church, Tracy and I were in church, and Pastor Ton got up to the pulpit, and before he started this sermon, he said, "Hey, I want to tell you something exciting. There's a young couple in our church who are stepping into full-time ministry, Russ and Tracy Smith, if you'll stand, and he's going to work for Youth for Christ, and we're so excited for him. And church, our job is to support this. So all of my ushers right now are going to hand out monthly support cards for Russ and Tracy. And we're going to take a minute. Everybody's going to fill out a card, and we're going to raise their financial support right here today." And so that day raised almost 60% of our financial need like that. But in the span of the next 2 weeks, I got in 2 car wrecks, neither my fault, totaled both of our cars. We got hit really hard with all those challenges. Our support got primarily raised, but it was still the fear of Taylor being, not born yet, and our cars being wrecked, and just this barrage of attacks that really made us question, like, did we really do this? But it really took me back to the Apostle Paul, where he had a vision that he was supposed to go to Macedonia, and he had a word from God that he was supposed to go to Macedonia. And he went to the elders and said, "Am I supposed to go to Macedonia?" And they said, "Yeah." So he goes to Macedonia, word from God, vision, elders confirm it. He's going to rock Macedonia. Come on. He gets to Macedonia, and he starts having to fight a girl possessed with demons. And then he gets thrown in prison. And he's like, "What? I had a vision? I had a word from God? The elders said yes, and I'm in prison. This is not ministry." And then, of course, the doors were open, the chains were broken, the prison guard was set free, and Paul began an amazing life that influences us today through his writings in the New Testament. So sometimes when God calls us, we think that everything is just going to fall in our lap and it's going to be a super smooth, easy walk. And that's not always true. There's a reason that it says we need to work out our salvation. It's work, but all things work together for those that are called. It's work, and it's a blessing to be called, and it's a blessing that he trusts me. But yeah, we had to be like the Apostle Paul and look beyond the moment. Go, no, we're called to this. We have a vision. We have a word from God. We have elders' approval. We're going to do what's right. We're going to worship in the middle of the night. And the beautiful part is at 11:59, and I'll wrap up with this. Midnight is God's favorite hour. In Exodus, it says that at midnight, the angel came through. At 11:59, the Hebrews were still abandoned, broken, fearful, denied. They didn't know that 12 o'clock, the midnight miracle was coming. It says that Samson at midnight tore up the gates of Gaza and took him to the top of the hill. At 11:59, he was still just an insecure nobody. But at midnight, he tore up the gates. It says that Ruth went to the feet of Boaz, her redeemer, trembling. And at midnight, he covered her. At 11:59, she was still a widow, in fear, trembling, not sure of her future. But that midnight miracle. And the Apostle Paul came, sitting in prison with Silas, their backs bleeding from being beaten. Dark, so dark that the prison guard can't see, so he thinks everyone's escaped. Total blackness. At 11:59, all they need to do was worship in the midnight miracle. So when I'm in that 11:59 moment, I know where we started. I go to church, I serve, I tithe, I read my Bible. I just do what's right, and you get a midnight miracle.
Russ, as you look back over 34 years of ministry now, and we just barely touched into the start, which is
So much.
which is fine. And the transformation that your life took from your childhood to your parents to the drugs to work to going into full-time ministry, are there any specific themes or major points that you bring out of that you've seen that can really help people, that can really help transform lives or give them hope?
Yeah.
If listeners are feeling in those same boats, like, oh man, I can't do this. I might feel like this passion or this calling to do something, but my story or all these things are holding me back. Is there anything specific like that?
Yeah.
I hope I didn't answer the question by asking the question.
No. One of the greatest devices of the enemy is to isolate us and make us feel alone. Nobody knows nobody feels what I feel. Everybody's going to judge me. Those lies. And the only way we break them is to have someone speak into our life. Everyone needs a coach. You have to have your guy, and you have to be a part of a community, and not let those voices isolate you and keep you from your dreams and keep you from the visions and the hope that's in there. A Bible verse says that we're overcomers by two ingredients: the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And the enemy can't do anything about the blood of the Lamb. He can't. It's what it is. It's perfect. It's redemptive. It's full of grace. God loves us. And with a moment's prayer for anyone that's listening, all I need to do is believe in my heart, confess with my mouth, Jesus, please forgive me. The enemy can't stop that. But the second ingredient is the word of my testimony. And if the enemy can keep me from speaking my hope, speaking my promise, speaking my freedom, that's 50% of the equation. He really isn't worried about me being redeemed and in a relationship with Jesus. He doesn't want me to be an overcomer. He wants me to be defeated. So I need to say my dreams. I need to verbalize my dreams. I need to go to someone and say, I'm struggling. Can you help me walk through this? I need both ingredients. I need the blood of the Lamb, and I need the word of my testimony.
I have one last question for you. And it's actually a question I've got from Stephen from a prior interview. If we here in Missoula, let's say on Reserve Street, if we had a billboard where that was your canvas and you could say one thing to the city of Missoula, those 30, 40,000, 50,000 cars driving by, if you could say one thing to Missoula on that billboard, what would it say?
Wow, that is a great question. What would I say on that billboard? Wow, I don't know if I could formulate it into a tagline. I guess the emphasis would be, it's never too late. If you're breathing, if you're reading this sign, there's hope. It's never too late. There's someone that will walk with you in this life. It is never too late.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate having you in, and we could have went for multiple hours, but so cool to hear your story and the impact and what this community has meant to you and all that you've given back.
Yeah, I love the city. I really do. I love Missoula, Montana. It's got its quirks and weaknesses, and I know it's got its political biases, but it is Missoula. And I love this city.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
What's up, Missoula? This is Nick Balla, producer of the Missoula Podcast. We truly appreciate you hanging out with us as we dive into the stories that make our city special. If you could do us a quick favor and follow the show wherever you are listening, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, maybe you're watching on YouTube, so hit that little subscribe button. It really helps us out. Head on over to www.themissoulapodcast.com for more information, and we'll see you next week.